This
of conducting
conference will
clinical
now be
trials.
recorded.
As a consequence, an ethical consideration of the trial before it is actually executed become a necessity. It is the noteworthy to see that such ethical considerations to have observed a transformation from being a moral and personal value. So regulatory authorities, that is ECs, are important. ECs means ethical committees in its current format have a short history in India. The first ICMR guideline recommended that the research proposal were to be reviewed by the IEC. Though it was voluntary, although such guidelines were not mandatory initially, it became essential in 2002 when Medical Council of India, that is MCI, asserted in its code of ethics that a medical doctor doing research requires to follow ICMR guidelines. These guidelines got further legal backing through the 2005 amendments in the Schedule Y Drug and Cosmetic Act of India. Seeing the prospects and importance of quality research in Ayurveda and other traditional systems of medicine in India, that Ministry of Ayush has taken an initiative to standardize research practices in Ayurveda, Siddha and Unani. A detailed guideline pertaining to the good clinical practices in ASU, that is GCP ASU, therefore came into existence. This document dealt elaborately with issues related to clinical trial designing and its effective execution. This document also dealt adequately with the issues of ethics pertaining to Ayurveda research and guided about the role and functioning of IEC in Ayurvedic teaching or research institutions. In an attempt to make Ayurveda research at its academic institutions more stringent, focused, and rigorous, Central Council of Indian Medicine, a regulatory authority of the matters of Ayurveda practices and education, has made a mandate that every research proposal of the Ayurveda postgraduate students be passed through IEC before it's actually accepted and submitted to respective universities. IEC as a mandatory condition before accepting any research proposal as a part of their postgraduate training programs. Ethics in the medical practices of allopath has been a subject of innumerable debates, seminars, and conferences. But the ethical issues at the interface and overlap of allopath and Ayurveda have received scant attention so far. That's why we have decided to organize this webinar on ethical issues in Ayurveda research. And we think to invite the most eminent person in this field, that is Dr. Supriya Bhalerao, to contribute her knowledge and share her experiences in this regards. I know everybody is eager to listen her speech. So I would like to request Dr. Bhor to introduce Dr. Bhalerao Madam's work. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Now I request our Honorable Principal Madam, Dr. Ragini Patil Madam, to give principal address. Is Madam arrived? Tapasvi sir? Hello? Principal Madam? Now, Madam, shall we continue or shall I request to our Vice Principal sir?
No, he is also not there. You can continue, okay. I think. Ma'am is not there. How can we see? How can we see the participants list?
I am seeing it, but Tapasvi sir? Madam is there, please tell me, otherwise I will proceed further.
मॅडम दिसत तरी नाहीये तिथे.
Okay, you can proceed then.
Okay. Now proceeding further, actual session, I am introducing our today's guest speaker shortly. Please fill the pre-assessment form as it will, the link will be closed in 5 minutes. Dr. Supriya Bhalerao Madam is MD and PhD in Sanskrit Samhita Department from Jamnagar, and she has done MA Sanskrit and PhD Diploma in Biostatistics. There are only 3 people who have done Diploma in Biostatistics in Ayurveda field. Now she is working as a scientist in Interactive Research Field of Health Affairs, that is IRSHA, at Bharati Vidyapeeth Deemed University, Pune. She has a very vast experience of research in biostatistics, meta-analysis in molecular biology and pharmacogenomics and clinical research. Her research areas are in Ayurvedic concepts and procedures in metabolic disorders. She has given 200 invited lectures on research methodology, biostatistics and scientific writing across the country. She has published 35 articles and 3 book chapters. She is the chairperson of 3 ethics committees. Now I request Dr. Supriya Bhalerao Madam to deliver most awaited lecture in this webinar. Supriya Madam, please.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I
Yes,
audible?
madam.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So, we are going to discuss today a very important topic, ethics in Ayurveda research. As Lad Madam has given a very nice introduction to the topic and its necessity, it is really one of the most important topics in research methodology. And still, it is very much neglected in Ayurveda as I see it, because the way the ethics is dealt is not up to the mark, as Dr. Lad was mentioning, the international guidelines or whatever are the current guidelines, we are not abiding to those guidelines. So in today's talk, we will try to see, this is a huge topic. Like biostatistics, ethics is also emerging, as Madam has rightly pointed out, that in modern medicine there are specially ethics related seminars, workshops, conferences. We have not yet reached to that stage, but this is a very important topic, and what we will do in today's talk, that I have divided the talk clearly in 2 parts. In first part we will see, and that's why I have changed the topic also a little bit, that ethics and Ayurveda research. So in first part we will see what is all about ethics and how the ethics committee should actually function. And in next half of the topic, we will see next half of the talk, we will see that how ethics can be implemented, or what are the ethics related issues in Ayurveda. And this is how I have divided the talk in 2 parts. So let us start with the first part of the presentation, that is ethics. Just a second. Okay. So what is ethics? Ethics is a branch of philosophy. If Lad Madam is listening to me, I am very much thankful to you, Madam, because you have done my job very easy. You have covered many of the things in your 2-minute speech. Ethics is a branch of philosophy that constitutes what is right and wrong, good and evil. And in day-to-day practice also, day-to-day life also, we say many times, this is ethical, this is not ethical. So ethics is not a new word for us. What is bioethics? It is an ethics which is related to biology, biomedicine, and that also can be divided into 2 parts. One is clinical ethics, like what precautions or what guidelines one has to be followed in practice, and the other part is research ethics. That is what we are going to deal today. Basically, clinical ethics. Hello. Clinical ethics also has many aspects, like it deals with various situations, how the ethics should be followed in ICU situations. If there are no bed empty, then how the patient's allotment should be done and all. This is a part of clinical ethics, and we are not going to deal with it. We are basically going to talk about research ethics. We all know about the unethical research experiments and the lessons we have learned from them. Nazi experiments, Willowbrook hepatitis experiments, Tuskegee syphilis study are few of these examples how the unethical research was carried out. And as a consequence of these unethical experiments, the biomedical ethics evolved worldwide. The Nuremberg Code was the first guideline or first code for ethics which came into existence in 1949. And since we all are the attendees, as I come to know from the organizers, are all either the EC members or the postgraduate guides or at least the PhD scholars. Everybody knows about this, so I'm not going to waste more time on this. But the evolution took part continuously from Nuremberg Code to ICH-GCP guidelines, and you might be aware that revised version of ICH-GCP also came recently. The E2 has been revised recently. What happened in India when so much evolution was happening worldwide? What happened in India? In India, ICMR released the policy statement about ethics in 1980, and then the Central Ethics Committee on Human Research was constituted in 1996. So that time there was only one ethics committee across the country, and anybody wants to do research has to send the applications to the ICMR's research ethics committee and get the sanction. But later on, the ethics committees were formed or institutionalized in every institution across the country. The ICMR guidelines were first after the policy statement. ICMR released the guidelines, proper guidelines in 2000. These guidelines also two times, they are revised two times, once in 2006 and recently in 2017 these guidelines were revised. And basically I'm going to take the support of these guidelines for today's talk. If you see this ICMR 2017 guidelines, and I will request every one of you to go through these guidelines. They are freely available on net. You have to just Google ICMR 2017 guidelines and you will get them. And it is a very nicely written document, and it gives you full flair what is about what is research ethics. Every aspect of research ethics has been covered in these guidelines. So it starts with the statement of general principles, general ethical issues, responsible conduct of research, and all these things you can see down below. Like first 6 chapters are common, which are the ethical issues up to vulnerability, and then the guidelines have entered into specific issues with respect to clinical trials of drugs and other interventions, public health research, what ethical precautions should be taken while doing public health research, social and behavioral science research, human genetics testing and research, biological material, biobanking, data sets, and research during humanitarian emergencies and disasters. So you can understand that what we are facing today, COVID-19. So if any research proposal come to us during this period, then we have to refer the section 12 of the guidelines, which is on the humanitarian emergency, because this is a situation when there is an emergency of finding out some remedy. We all know the basic ethical principles: beneficence, non-beneficence, autonomy, which basically talk about the respect for persons, and justice. So these 4 basic ethical principles have to be followed in each and every research proposal. And what we talk about ethics committee, they should assure that these ethical principles are being followed in any of the research proposal come to them. These 4 basic principles have been further elaborated in 12 general ethical principles, and these 12 general ethical principles are also equally important. These are also from the ICMR guidelines, and these principles, I am going to take little time on these principles. The first principle is of essentiality. That means whatever research you are doing, whether it is most essential to do that research, and if yes, then whether the human participants are necessary for that kind of research, or whether we can do it on animals or in vitro or laboratory setup. So that is the first principle, that is essentiality. Voluntariness, of course, the participants who will participate have to be voluntarily participating in that particular research project, because we want to avoid the situation like Nazi experience. Non-exploitation, the term is quite clear. Social responsibility, whenever we do any research, it has to be taken into consideration that the research is not creating any social drift. It is not affecting the social environment. Then ensuring privacy and confidentiality. Superficially, both these words sound similar, but remember that privacy is the right of study participants, whereas confidentiality is obligation of the researcher. Privacy, maintaining privacy of own documents, or while taking history or while reviewing any report, patient has right to say that this has to be maintained private. So privacy is right of patient, whereas confidentiality, that means all the documents need to be kept confidential. Only few persons should be accessing those documents. This is the researcher obligation. So this is how these two words are different. Risk minimization is explanation of the same principle of non-maleficence. Professional competence. Whenever we are doing any research study, whether the investigator has competence to do that particular study. I may want to do anything like gene expression study, genome analysis, whatever I may wish as a researcher to do. But whether do I have that competence? And remember, competence is different than education. My PhD degree doesn't give me competence to do everything. So competence is a skill and science mixture of both. Whereas education just talk about your whatever you have learned as a formal degree. Maximization of benefit, again beneficence is the principle which is getting reflected here. Institutional arrangements is also an important feature of these general ethical principles. Whether your institution is equipped and have all the facilities to take care of any emergency which arises in the research project, as well as to support whatever will be required for conducting the research project. Transparency and accountability, everything should be transparent. This is the first rule of research, that whatever you do has to be transparent, and every person in the team has to be accountable for what the person is doing. Totality of responsibility, whatever happens as an outcome of the research is the responsibility of the investigator, ethics committee, and all the responsible or all the involved stakeholders. And ultimately, environmental protection. That means the research project should not create any disturbance in environment in any way. So these are the general ethical principles which we need to consider while doing any research. Then comes the ethics committee. And remember that this is ethics committee. As an outcome of this lecture, if you stop calling it as ethical committee, then also I think half the purpose of this lecture is achieved. Because why we shouldn't call it as ethical committee? Because any committee in the institution, let it be sports committee, let it be anti-harassment committee, anti whatever committee you have, that purchase committee, any committee which you have in the institution has to be ethical in nature. So every committee has to be ethical. Whenever you say that there is a committee, it is expected that every person is behaving ethically and the committee itself is also behaving ethically. So it is not an ethical committee, it is ethics committee which looks after the ethics in research proposals. So what is ethics committee? It is any board, committee, or other group which is formally designated by an institution to review, approve the initiation of, and conduct periodic review of biomedical research involving human participants. So I'm just giving you overview and what are the problems with Ayurveda that we will see at the in the second part of the lecture. But every word of this statement is important. Ethics committee not only approves the project, but it has to conduct the periodic review also of the research projects which are going on in the institution. The committee has to be independent. That means the college administration and college management shouldn't influence the functioning of ethics committee. The college principal should nowhere be involved in the functioning of ethics committee. The committee has to be competent enough, and as I have told you, competence is not only education but skills also, that has to be competent enough to perform or execute the functions which are expected. So what is the composition of the ethics committee? I'm sure every one of you knows that what is the composition. The committee has to be multidisciplinary and multi-sectorial, and that's why we have lay person, we have philanthropy person, even the lawyer in the committee. Then there should be adequate representation of age and gender. It should not be like that all people are of older age and there is no representation of younger age. This is important because whenever ethics committee is reviewing any proposal, the opinion from all sectors of the community or society should get reflected. Preferably, 50% of the members should be non-affiliated to the institution, or they should be from outside the institution. There should be balance between medical and non-medical, technical and non-technical members, depending upon the need of the institution. And the number of members in the ethics committee should be from 7 to 15. They always have to be in odd numbers, because if the voting has to be done, then odd numbers are preferable. And for any meeting, minimum 5 members have to be present. If 5 members are not present, that meeting is not considered as a meeting done. Okay. And one more thing is, like any institution can decide its quorum for the institution. For example, I can decide that my institution will have 9 members as a quorum. So quorum can be institution specific, but minimum 5 members have to be there for the meeting. Then there are terms of references, and why I wish to highlight these, the second point specifically, that the term of EC membership may be 2 to 3 years. So you cannot have constant chairpersons, that this is EC chairperson and he is there for last 10 years. So this is not the way how it should be. The head of the institution should appoint EC members, including the chairperson, by issuing an appointment letter, and that letter should clearly tell that for how long the EC will be there, this particular membership will continue, and after that maybe 2 terms a person can do. For example, if you decide that 2 years, this particular EC will long for 2 years, then one person can go for 2 terms, but not necessarily, definitely not for 3 or 4 terms. Or you cannot have a chairperson or member secretary or member who is permanent member of ethics committee. This cannot be there. This situation is a very wrong situation. Members should be trained in human research protection. So this is also equally important, that everybody who is sitting in the EC should be acquainted with the human research protection rights, whatever regulations are there, EC functions, SOPs of the EC. SOPs is the standard operating procedures, and should be conversant with ethical guidelines, GCP guidelines, everything. Means whatever is related to the ethics, the person has to be, the member has to be trained in that. And if you appoint somebody who is not trained in this thing, then the ethics committee has to arrange a training for training that person. But no one can serve on EC without any training of ethics. Then what are the roles and responsibilities? Whatever I have talked to you, like what we have discussed so far, same thing is there, that the EC has to ensure protection of dignity, rights, safety, and well-being of the participants, to ensure the ethical conduct of research by the investigators, to declare conflict of interest, and I'm going to touch upon this, what is conflict of interest, to perform its function through competent initial and continuing review. See, here also it is written that continuing review. It is not like that you have once approved the proposal, that means now EC is free from that proposal. It is never like that. There should be a continuing review of all scientific, ethical, medical, and social aspects of research projects. Then the other important thing is, whatever universal ethical values we have discussed, or we are saying that there are international guidelines, but whenever we implement them in our institution, we may have to modify them little, or we have to adopt them according to local community values, customs, and needs. How that is, that we will discuss in the Ayurveda research part. To assist in development and education of research committees. See, this is also a research community. See, this is also one of the tasks of research ethics committee, that they should develop and educate other people also. They should have some training, ongoing trainings in between. Then to ensure the privacy of individual and confidentiality of data, we have already discussed what is privacy and what is confidentiality. Then to review the progress reports, final reports, and for that EC has to have a mechanism that every proposal which they sanction, they should ask for progress report 6 monthly, annually, whatever. The duration can be decided by the committee as a SOP, but EC should ask for the progress reports. Then to carry out monitoring, this is also an important work of ethics committee, that they can suddenly go and visit the site in the sense OPD or where the records have been kept. EC members can visit that particular place and see whether the things are going on properly. Ethics committee members, but this has to be informed, or this has to be, sometimes it has to be, if AC finds out that there is too much of mess going on in a particular study, then EC members can go without informing the investigator. But generally, for the routine visits, the investigator should be pre-informed, and they can go on site. The EC members can go on site, whether the informed consent is being documented properly, whether what is expected through informed consent is being done properly. This all can be ensured by the ethics committee members. Their job is not only to come and sit for a particular meeting and then everything is over. To participate in continuing education activities in research ethics and get updated on the given guidelines and regulations. And importantly, that ethics committee, because all the research proposals from institution come to them, they can harmonize, they can make some efforts that me too or replication of the research can be avoided through ethics committee, because this is the committee which comes to know that what all kind of research proposals are coming, and then they can have some dialogue between the investigators working on a similar problem. Which are the type of studies ethics committee considers? So there are academic studies like MD, PhD theses, or investigator initiated studies. Sometimes departmental projects are taken up by some institutions, pharma sponsored studies, government agencies such as ICMR or Ministry of Ayush funded studies. Just let me tell you that for all these studies, the review process is same. There are no different guidelines, that for pharma sponsored studies, the guidelines are different. For academic studies, the guidelines are lenient. It is not like that. The guidelines are same. The review process is same for all kinds of studies. Then what is expected to be reviewed? And you will see that there is an extensive list of documents which has to be reviewed by ethics committee. And this is not what I am telling you, this is as per the ICMR guidelines. So first of all, the cover letter to member secretary that we are submitting so and so project. Then type of review requested. So you will find some new words in this, and we will see these words, what is the meaning of these words very soon. So type of review is something which has to be mentioned. Application form for initial review. Then informed consent document in English and its translation in local languages, protocol, case record form, questionnaires, if there are any recruitment procedures, how the investigator is going to recruit patients, through advertisements, through any notices, or through OPD, whatever. What is the recruitment procedure? Then patient instruction card, diary, drug diaries, or sometimes if you are working on some procedures like yoga, then you may ask the patient to tick in a diary that he has performed the yoga on that particular day. So likewise, the diaries have to be given. Investigators brochure, that is the information about the study drug which is applicable mainly to pharma sponsored studies. Details of funding agency, sponsor, and fund allocation. So EC can ask, or EC has to ask for the budget, because one of the function of EC is to ensure that the research investigator is also conducting the research as per the ethical values. So he or she is not overcharging. That also has to be taken by that also has to be taken care of by the ethics committee. So budget needs to be submitted to ethics committee for the funded projects. Brief curriculum vitae of all the study researchers, a statement on COI, that is conflict of interest, which we are going to see, GCP training certificate of the investigators, that investigator has also undergone a GCP training, especially for pharma sponsored studies. You have to ask for these things. Then any other research ethics or other training evidence. For example, in Maharashtra, we have the MUHS research methodology workshop, and it is expected that every scholar who is entering in MD should undergo that training. So that certificate also needs to be provided. Undertaking by the investigators that they will abide by all the ethical values, all the institutional rules while conducting the clinical research. Regulatory permissions, that means if the drug is, in our case, it will be mostly Ayurveda drug. So FDA licensing for pharma sponsored studies. Again, FDA license for manufacturing, marketing, is it available? Memorandum of understanding in case of studies involving collaboration with other institutions. So suppose you want to collaborate with my institution, we are a research institution and we have state of art research facility. So maybe you would like to collaborate with me, but then you just can't verbally ask me and forget. You should take some agreement, some letter from me, especially from head of my institution, that we are ready for collaborating with you. Clinical trial agreement between sponsors, investigator, and head of the institution. Again, this is for pharma sponsored studies. Documentation of clinical trial registration. So, clinical trials in India have to be registered with CTRI, that is Clinical Trial Registry of India. Everybody of us know this. Now, the point here is that CTRI registration requires the ethics committee approval. And again, ethics committee has to document the CTRI registration. So maybe the ethics committee can tell the investigators that after the approval, when you will register the trial with CTRI, please provide us back the number which you will get from CTRI. Then insurance and indemnity policy, again for pharma sponsored studies, and any additional document as required by the ethics committee. Suppose a project is being done at 2-3 places, then ethics committee clearances from other sites also EC can ask for. So these are different documents which are to be reviewed by the ethics committee. So you can understand that it is a huge work. It is not a very simple work. Even if we talk about MD, PhD thesis or studies, then also we have to check for the protocol in detail, case record form, recruitment procedures, patient instruction card, diary, and even the translations of the informed consent document. So lot many things have to be checked by the ethics committee. We have come across these few new words in this document, in this list. One is conflict of interest. So conflict of interest is a set of conditions where professional judgment concerning the primary interest, such as participants' welfare or the validity of research, tends to be unduly influenced by secondary interests, such as financial or non-financial. I will give you just an example that if I am working on a ethics committee of the organizers institution, say Akurdi College of Ayurveda, and some proposal by my friend is submitted, then I will not look the proposal in very great detail because it is my friend's proposal, and I will just sanction. Even though I'm trained in ethics and bioethics, I will say, oh, it is my friend's proposal, let it be. I will be giving leeway to that proposal. So this is called as conflict of interest. And this conflict of interest can happen at the level of researchers. It can happen even at the level of EC member. Researcher can also have a conflict of interest. Suppose one pharma industry approaches me and tells me to do a study on their product. I may not like that product. I may feel that, okay, this product may not work. This is not a very good combination which they are proposing. But still, I will do the study because I will get some kind of professional fees from that for my institution, or some additional benefits which I can have. I will accept the study. So the COI or conflict of interest can happen at the level of researcher, at the level of ethics committee member, at the level of institutions, or even at the level of sponsor, because it is just a bias. As we in a research methodology say, there shouldn't be any bias. When it comes to evaluation of the projects, conflict of interest shouldn't affect the study results or study conduct. So we have to take care of this conflict of interest. Then in the list of documents to be submitted, we have seen the types of review. Which kind of review we are expecting from the ethics committee has to be also mentioned. So there are 3 types of review which ethics committee can do. First is exemption from review. I mean, some proposals may not need ethics committee permission. But remember that investigator cannot decide that my project can be exempted from ethics committee purview. Even though I know in this exemption from review are the proposals which have less than minimal risk. What is minimal risk is shown in the box below, that it is a probability of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research is not greater than ordinarily encountered in routine daily life activities. So whatever harm we can accept in a day-to-day life, it is the risk is not more than that, or it is actually less than that minimal risk. So these kind of proposals are if you want to do secondary data analysis. That means if I want to do CTRI data on CTRI, if I want to analyze, or if I want to analyze some what is a trend of research being done in different colleges of Ayurveda in the country. So this kind of research I want to do. So there is no risk to anybody. So it is less than minimal risk, and these kind of proposals do not need ethics committee permission, but the investigator cannot decide it. He has to write to ethics committee that I'm going to do this kind of study, and kindly allow me for taking exemption from review because it is less than minimal risk. So this kind of letter should come from the investigator to ethics committee, and then ethics committee has to approve that or send a letter back that okay, your study has been exempted from review. The other type of review is expedited review, where there is no more than minimal risk. Means the risk level is as good as the minimal risk. And then there is a full committee review meeting where there is a more than minimal risk. So if you are subjecting the patients to blood collection, then also it is more than minimal risk because every day you are not going to prick yourself by needle. So blood collection also involves more than minimal risk, and for that you have to have a full committee review. So these are the three types of review which generally are called by ethics committee, and this decision has to be taken by member secretary. No one else can take this decision, but the member secretary decides that which kind of review a particular project will undergo. Often we have a question that why we should have legal expert and a social person or the philanthropist and a lay person in the committee. And generally it so happens that they just sit for the meeting, they don't understand anything, and then they get bored and don't participate in the next meeting. Remember that the list which I have shown you, that what all documents the ethics committee should review, was an extensive list, and of that whatever is a legally related, whatever the legally related documents are, have to be reviewed by the legal experts. So it includes the clinical trial agreement, the regulatory approvals, insurance documents. So all these things, there is a word like HMSC. We generally do not do these international collaboration studies, but if somebody wants to do any collaboration with international university or universities abroad, then we have to take a permission from Health Ministry Screening Committee. We cannot just start doing a project in collaboration with any other university outside India, any other organizations, even like even if you want to do a study with WHO, you have to take HMSC permission. So anything you are going to do outside India, you have to take HMSC's permission. And then the legal expert has to interpret and inform the ethics committee members about the new regulations, if any. Something new if comes in, then the language is also very difficult to understand for us, particularly doctors. So legal expert can interpret it in a simple way to us. The social scientist also has a good role in the ethics committee, that he has to review the ICD, the informed consent document, very thoroughly, because these are the persons, the social scientists and lay persons are the two persons who do not have any background of medical sciences. So whatever is written in informed consent, whether they can understand it. If they can understand it, then anybody, any lay person can understand. It is understood like this. So social scientists have to go through the informed consent document, then assess the impact of on community involvement, socio-culture context, like how the research will affect all these things. Is the research will affect? If not, then only he can say yes for the project. And the person has to serve as a patient or participant's representative. So that is the main role which social scientist and lay person has to play in the ethics committee. You will find it very surprising, but once I have attended one lecture in the modern medicine ethics committee discussions, and that lecture was on who is layperson, who should be a layperson. So see, for simple things also they have given so much of importance. That layperson who can play as a, or who can serve as a layperson in the ethics committee. Anybody who is working as a staff technician in my lab, can that person be called as a layperson only because the person doesn't have medical degree? No. So layperson really shouldn't have any medical background. No person in the family also is involved with medical. Some famous doctor's wife, if you take her on as a layperson on ethics committee as a layperson, she knows many of the things. So layperson should be really lay in terms of medical sciences, and that person's responsibility is primarily to serve again as a patient or participant's representative. That if the person feels, no, I'm not comfortable to participate in such kind of study, then it is really a time to think for the ethics committee that something is wrong in the proposal. So to involve these three people, lawyer, social scientist and layperson, in the ethics committee deliberations is a job of chairperson. He has to see that every person is participating in the discussions actively and giving some suggestions. Whenever a final decision has to be taken on a proposal, everybody's opinion needs to be considered while saying yes or no finally. So then there are elements of review, and I'm going into details of these things, and that is the main functioning, how the ethics committee should perform, or how the ethics committee should actually review the proposals. So the first point is scientific design and conduct of the study, and there the ethics committee has to review the objectives of the study, statistical considerations in the sense whether the sample size considered is not very small that or very large, so that the results may not go waste, the effort should not go waste. That is the whole objective. And justification for the use of control arms. If the study involves placebo, then whether the placebo is justified, that has to be considered by the ethics committee. Remember that bad science cannot lead to good ethics. So bad science is always bad ethics. But still, the role of ethics committee is not to go into the very much details of each study, that why you have used these drugs, why not those drugs, why are you using duration in this process, in this proposal, why are you not using Basti in this proposal. These are not the questions which should be asked by ethics committee, because there is a research review committee in the hospital, in the colleges, which has to look after all these scientific angles of the research proposal. When the proposal comes to ethics committee has to look after certain things of the methodology, such as objectives, because there should not be any wrong outcome coming out of the study. So risk benefit, or the sample size in terms of not wastage, no wastage of the resources. In these terms, the ethics committee should review the scientific component of the research proposals, and not from the science or technical parts of the research study, because that is the part of research review committee. In some colleges, research review committee and ethics committee are one and the same. Only one committee is there which serves both the aspects of the study, like scientific reviewing also and ethical reviewing also. There the committee can give both kinds of suggestions. But if your committee is only ethics committee, then you should not go into the details that why not this drug, why not that disease. That is the perspective of research review committee of the institution. The second part of review process is to assess the risk and benefit, because we have said that basic principle involves non-maleficence, no maleficence and beneficence. So we have to take care of risk and benefit, and we have to see that in every research proposal, what are the benefits? And that benefits can be to participant, the benefits can be to society, the benefits can be to scientific knowledge. Because I will just give you a simple example. If you want to study, if a research proposal comes to you that wants to evaluate the proportion or the distribution of patients or proneness of individuals of particular prakriti to some diseases, some disease like in diabetes, which kind of prakriti patients are seen more. Now, if this kind of research proposal study comes to you, for the participant whose prakriti the research investigator will take, has no benefit by participating in the study. On the contrary, he is going to spend his time for you, and you are not going to give. Means no such proposal has a scheme like some guidelines will be given to those patients or participants to avoid future risk of diseases. Nothing is there like this kind of provision in the research proposal. So the participant comes, the investigator takes the prakriti, and then the participant just goes. There is no benefit for the participant, but there is a benefit to society, because if you identify that these particular prakriti persons are more prone to diabetes, then maybe some precautions can be taken. There is an advancement, there is a benefit to scientific knowledge. So we have to consider the benefits at different level, as well as the harms or risk also needs to be considered at different levels. The risk or the harms cannot be only at physical level, but even the harms can be at psychological level. Now, social harms we are seeing in case of COVID, that anybody comes positive, it is like, "Arey, wo positive nikla, arey, ye positive nikla." So there is some kind of stigmatization associated with this. In case of COVID, it is still small, but you know the diseases where this kind of stigmatization and discrimination can happen. Economic harm. If you if you are going to call the participant many times for the blood investigations, and you are not going to, compensate for the travel, then why the participant should bear the economical harm for coming to your clinic? Legal harms are there, harm to dignity. So there are different, and all these components have been beautifully explained in the ICMR guidelines. And as a EC members, those who are EC members in the audience should ask themselves that how many times we consider all these aspects while reviewing a proposal. Then again, the next points in the risk benefit assessment only. Criteria for prematurely withdrawing research participants. We might say that if in a case of diabetes studies, if the blood sugar level increases, then the participant will be withdrawn from the study. Only simple sentence is written. But what is planned after withdrawal? What you are going to do with the participant then? Criteria for suspending or terminating the research as a whole. Sometimes in a government projects or in pharma sponsored projects also this can happen, that company wants to suddenly change the policy. They don't want to continue the study now. So what, whoever is ongoing on the study, what you will do with those participants? Tomorrow suddenly if you stop the study, they are receiving the medicine. So what is the provision? And has it been written in the proposal? That ethics committee has to see. Provisions made for monitoring and auditing conduct of the research. So what are the monitoring provisions, like whether the recruitment is being done properly, whether the consent is being done properly, how the EC is going to ensure, and what are the inbuilt mechanism the investigator has proposed. So now when we do government sponsored studies at my institution, we appoint an external monitor, because government doesn't have that kind of facility. So for us, we involve a external monitor. That monitor comes and reviews our study completely, the documents, the case record forms and all, and then gives us the report of his monitoring. Then qualifications of PI, site facilities for diagnosing, managing serious adverse events. We will see this more in the Ayurvedic part, but whether the facilities which have been mentioned, because many times students have this kind of tendency. I will do this. Where are you going to do this? So and so institution in the city has this provision. Okay, have you talked with them? No, I will talk later. But what if the head of that institution rejects, refuses to offer you that facility afterwards? So that's why MOUs are important. Then risk benefit assessment has an important part is of handling the vulnerability. We know that in Nazi experiments also the participants were vulnerable. Even in Willowbrook hepatitis experiment, the participants were vulnerable because they were institutionalized children. So vulnerability is of different types. There can be a cognitive. Suppose if suppose you want to do a study in patients or in individuals who are not cognition, their cognition is hampered by some or other thing, and you want to do these kind of, you want to do some research projects in those participants, then how will you tell them about the research study? Because they are not in a condition to understand your research study. How will you assure that the informed choice is facilitated? What are the barriers to prevent participants to exercise choice to participate? I mean, they are not, suppose you want to do studies in people, if not cognitively impaired, that doesn't mean that very, psychiatrically very poor condition or so. But even if by some or other reason, if the participant or patient is not in condition to give the informed consent, then how you will overcome this issue? Institutional vulnerability. Suppose I say that I am going to recruit my students only, then they have to participate. They have no choice. I'm a PhD scholar. I am doing my PhD. So for some particular study, I want to do effect of Shodhana Karma or effect of Panchakarma in healthy volunteers. So I will ask my own students to participate. And in that case, they don't have any choice because their madam is doing the research. They have no say. They will participate. So in this case, we have to see whether there is an institutional vulnerability, then there is a medical vulnerability. For example, now in COVID situation, if you come up with some, if somebody comes up with some research proposal and proposes to give some hope to the patients, then everybody would like to participate in that because there is no standard of care as of now for a COVID like situation. So this is a medical vulnerability because it is a research. Anybody would like to participate as there is a no standard of care available. Economic vulnerability, like poor participants. If you want to accommodate them, include them, recruit them in your study, then what is the undue inducement you are giving to them that we will pay for? Are you telling? I mean, are the investigators going to tell in this way that आपका ट्रीटमेंट फ्री में हो जाएगा, आपका इन्वेस्टिगेशन भी फ्री में हो जाएगा, सो बेटर यू पार्टिसिपेट इन द स्टडी. दिस इज अ इकोनॉमिक वल्नरेबिलिटी. Social vulnerability, like Tuskegee syphilis study, which was done in Black Americans. So in that, a particular caste or tribe was focused. So this is a social vulnerability. Whoever is a suppressed community, suppressed kind of group, then involve them in the study. So are we doing such kind of these things? Then the recruitment of research participants. Who will be the participants? Their gender, age, literacy, everything. So we have to assess the vulnerability in the research proposals. How will participants be contacted and recruitment conducted? If any advertisements will be put up, then the matter of advertisement has to be also passed by the ethics committee. The investigator cannot put up advertisements or give advertisements on his own without informing the ethics committee. How will full information to be given to potential research participants, and who will give? Because there is a tendency that first of all, whenever informed consent is there, there is a mention that this is a research project. So are we telling all these things properly to the participants, or we are telling only half of the things? That has to be assured. Inclusion exclusion criteria for research participants, and that is for many things. Inclusion exclusion criteria is important. Is there any undue risk we are creating for the participants if they participate in the study? So this has to be looked up in the inclusion exclusion criteria, that what is the clinical condition mentioned in the inclusion exclusion criteria. The next review component is care and protection of research participants. So the PI should be equipped, PI should be experienced. Then the standard therapy is whether we are going to withdraw or withhold for the research purpose. Suppose a patient is on anti-diabetic medication. Are we going to stop that and give our Ayurvedic medicines? Then what will be the risk? What will be the benefits? Everything should be assessed. What medical care will be provided to research participants during and after the course of the research also? Means if something goes wrong during the study, during the course of research, what care we are going to provide, and even after the completion of course, what kind of care we are going to provide. Post-trial access plans. We always mention Declaration of Helsinki. So the latest version of Declaration of Helsinki, which came in 2013 mentions about post-trial access to the medicines. You have participants, you are giving them medicines, fine. Your trial stops, 90 days treatment over. What the patient is expected to do on 91st day? Is it like a situation that now the investigator is no way bound to the participant, or will the investigator give some kind of prescription to the patients? Will the patient have to bear any cost? Because the general claim is this is a routine, so let the participants do let the participant bear the cost of investigation. Are we going to give any compensation to research participants, and at the same time any rewards also, that if you participate and if you complete the study, we will give something to you? This is an inducement, and undue inducement has to be clearly sorted out. Care and protection of research participants, in that compensation has to be taken care of. Insurance, whether now for pharma companies also, we can ask for the insurance of the whole study. There are agencies which give blanket insurance for a clinical trials, and we should go for those kind of insurance. Even for the government sponsored studies, you can have a provision for this kind of insurance. Manner in which the results of the research will be reported and published, whether the identity of participants will be revealed or disclosed, or photographs will be presented, how the publication will come into existence. Then protection of research participants' confidentiality is important part of ethical review, that what is written by the investigator, who will access the data, who all can see the medical records, who all can have access to the samples of the patients, how will confidentiality and security of personal information be ensured? Because you know that certain diseases, as I have already said, can create social stigmatization. Informed consent process is the most important thing, and everybody of the ethics committee, everyone, the law person, the lawyer, the lay person, everybody should look into the informed consent. What is the process for obtaining informed consent, and how the process, whether it is audiovisual, whether how it is going to be done. In our case, audiovisual is less likely, but who is going to obtain the consent, and how the investigator is going to ensure that the adequacy how the adequacy, that whatever information is given is complete, is adequate, and it is understandable to the participant. It is always said that the informed consent document should be in the language which the participants can understand. If you write big statements and big sentences that diabetes is a great pandemic and it is creating a health burden on the world's economy, maybe the participants are not able to understand this. So we have to see that the matter, the content of informed consent is understandable to the participants. Who is going to consent? The patient himself, or if the patient is illiterate, then impartial witness, or in certain cases legally accepted representative of the patient. Who is going to give the informed consent? You might be aware of the assent. Assent is to be given by the children who are in the age group above 7 years and up to 18 years, because they can make choices for them. And even if parents agree and the children in this age group do not agree to participate, you cannot include the child in the study. This is something which we have to remember. And lastly, the review element is of community consideration. It is not much concerned with us because we do not do community kind of studies, but still if we are going to involve participants from a specific community, then we should talk to the authorities or representatives from the community, and it is sometimes better to have a community representative in the ethics committee. So this was all about the ethics committee and ethics committee functioning and how we should go about it. So you might have understood that there are different components how we should review the proposals from ethical viewpoint. Now we will come to the Ayurveda research specific issues, because many times we say that okay, this all is fine, but many of the things are not applicable to us, because we are not going to do such hi-fi kind of researches where there will be ethical concerns. And you are right to some extent that we are not going to do very hi-fi biologicals and monoclonal antibodies and somewhat devices, recombinant therapies. We are not going to do research on these things, but we have our own issues. Now I am going to show you only 2 case studies, and these are actual case studies that an investigator has applied to ethics committee for a study entitled Clinical Evaluation of Efficacy of Nebulization using hydroalcoholic extract of Kantakari. This study was a part of MD thesis of a student from Kaumarabhitta department. Obviously, the study was planned in children. So, can you see the ethical issues in this particular research proposal? Yes, there was a nebulization, which is not an Ayurvedic dosage form. There is a hydroalcoholic extract, which is again not a Ayurvedic formulation type. So these two things are definitely there. So the ethics committee should ask for some safety data, some pre-clinical studies, and then only the ethics committee should approve this kind of proposal. Another study is a published study, which is published in Indian Journal of Medical Research in 2013. And this study is done in HIV patients. It has 2 arms. One was the antiretroviral therapy and another was a polyherbal formulation. And at the midterm analysis, that after 6 months or so, they analyzed the patients in between, and 28 patients continuing in polyherbal formulation arm, they found that their count was low, the CD4 count was lower than 200, and they were asked to go or shift the another arm. So 18 patients accepted to get transferred. 10 patients didn't accept this thing, and 12 agreed to move to heart, thereby creating a third arm called PHF, that is polyherbal formulation to heart group, while 16 remained in the polyherbal formulation arm. And out of these 16 who remained in the polyherbal formulation arm, in spite of CD4 less that 200, 3 participants voluntarily dropped down. This is what study has reported. So this study was done on a polyherbal formulation. So can you see the ethical issues here? The study was done in HIV, and one group had antiretroviral therapy and another has polyherbal formulation. So in such cases, you cannot have the arm like polyherbal formulation. You should have another group with heart and PHF. This could have been a very well designed study. Plus, at the midterm analysis, they told the participants to shift to the heart. They did not stop the study there because the participants had the CD4 count less than 200. In spite of that, they did not stop the study there. They asked the participants to take the decision to shift to the another arm. So on this particular paper, there is an ethical commentary written that what are the issues in this particular ethical issues in these particular studies, and you will find such research articles written on ethics. So for our case, there are examples where we should consider the ethical issues, and one is clinical studies with drugs. Whenever we are dealing with drugs, then you know that safety data of different magnitude is required for different categories of drugs. That is, classical drugs, there is no need of toxicity data, but if there are patent and proprietary medicines, herbal extracts, herbo-mineral formulation, the EC should ask for the toxicity data whenever required. Method of preparation in case of herbo-mineral formulations, because you know there are different methods for preparation of these formulations. So the method has to be clearly mentioned in the research proposal. Mention of metal content in PIS is advisable. PIS is a patient information or participant information sheet. That sheet should provide all ingredients, list of all ingredients, especially ingredients like garlic or animal products like cow urine, which are religiously sensitive for some communities in our country. So all products need to be mentioned very clearly. Studies on phytopharmaceuticals, like this is a new category of herbal, it is not actually herbal, but new category of drugs which fall in the purview of DCGI, and they are not actually the Ayurvedic drugs, but they are a combination of 4 phytoconstituents or so. So for that, DCGI permission is required. The EC has to be registered with CDCSO. So these things have to be taken care of. Certificate stating stability of the test drugs in long-term studies, because you know that in our drugs there are some ingredients which are hydrophobic, so they can these drugs can deteriorate, or they can lose their potency in the rainy seasons, or like any environmental condition can affect the drug. So for long term studies, at least the stability testing has to be confirmed. And newer dosage form, as we have seen in case of nebulization, the ethics committee has to be very careful. Then clinical studies on therapeutic procedures like Panchakarma. Many studies are done on the modified procedures, like something is changed. Some Gritapan procedure is changed, Grita is changed, the way it is administered is changed. In that case, the advantages and disadvantages of the modified procedure should be mentioned by the investigator, or the EC has to consider the risk benefit assessment of the newly developed procedure. For any procedure based study, the investigator has to submit the standard operating procedure. In view of potential adverse events, we always say that nothing goes wrong. But suppose after a month, severe dehydration happens, or after Virechand severe dehydration happens. Is there facility nearby where the emergency management can be done? This is the job of AC. AC should look for all these things. If the procedure involves use of newly developed equipment like automated Basti Yantra, automated Shirodhara Yantra, suppose something goes wrong, the Basti has to be given very slowly. That is what is indicated in text. But suppose this automated Yantra passes it very fast and something happens, some rupture happens inside. Who is responsible? So how we are going to ensure the safety? All these things have to be considered by EC while reviewing the proposals. Clinical study on non-pharmacological measures like yoga, meditation, lifestyle modifications. These studies are generally long-term because they take long time to show their effect. At least 3 months, 4 months, the patients will be on these studies. So we need to have stringent protocols with frequent follow-ups to ensure that the safety. It shouldn't happen that diabetic patients are on yoga and they are doing yoga for 6 months and we have not checked their glycosylated hemoglobin for 6 months and the patient deteriorates. So for such long-term studies, we should have intermittent checkpoints to ensure the safety. Then clinical studies involving placebo or modern medicine as a comparator. If such kind of studies are being done, placebo has to be strictly avoided except psychological or psychosomatic conditions. In case of modern drug may be an ongoing therapy also at the background, that patient is having diabetes, so his anti-diabetic drugs are continued, something like that. Or you can have add-on studies also, that one group receives metformin, another group receives metformin and herbal drug, something like that. So modern drug involvement can be in a different way. But if there is a modern drug involved in a clinical study, then a modern medicine physician has to be there at least on your roll, because if the modern medicine drug has to be titrated, the dose has to be changed, the drug has to be changed, who will do it? So for that, at least a modern medicine physician has to be there. Then the terminology, please remember that the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 is a terminology for modern drug development, because there the phase 1 is considered as first time in human. And for our drugs, the drugs are already in use in centuries, and that's why the safety is assured. Somewhere the safety is assured. So the phase is not a word which has to be used in a clinical studies with Ayurveda, that phase 2, phase 3. It is basically for a drug development. If you have a project which has that drug development kind of approach, then definitely use phases. But in general, we need not to use the phases term. New indication is something a tricky thing, and this is also based on my actual experience. That suppose something like suppose Chandra Prabhavati in diabetes, type 2 diabetes, if this is a research proposal, then the EC raises a question that type 2 diabetes is a new indication, and you have to go through the safety and in phase 1 and phase 2. So I have already told you that phases are not actually applicable for Ayurveda. And diabetes and prameha. Diabetes, do we need to consider diabetes as a new indication, or it is a disease which is having a close symptomatology with a disease mentioned in Ayurveda that we need to really consider? Because I feel that we can have two types of this new indication: a disease which is having a modern medicine disease which is having a similarity with Ayurvedic disease like prameha and diabetes. We need not to consider it as a new disease. But where there is a completely new indication, for example, no similarity in symptomatology, XDR TB, multi-drug resistant TB, there is nothing like multi-drug resistant TB in Ayurveda. So maybe we can consider that time as a new condition, but not every disease which is termed in a allopathy or modern medicine terms. We should not blindly say that it is a new indication. And the words role, effect, efficacy, and effectiveness also has a typical meanings, and the ethics committee members can guide the investigators on this. That effect can be of adverse and beneficial both kinds, so it is an exploratory kind of study. Efficacy is when you know that the drug is going to work and you want to assess the magnitude of the effect. Effectiveness is generally studies which are done for the real life situations. That if when you give drug to anybody, what kind of effect the drug produces. Financial concerns, yes, the Ayurvedic disease has to be very vigilant, because generally the studies which come to us are MD PhD thesis, and the cost is either borne by the patients or the student bears the cost of these investigations. But how much load we are putting on the students, and that too for the sake of our curiosity, that we need to manage. We need to balance that how much money that student can also invest. And post trial access is another concern, because who will give the post trial? At least the students who are working, MD, PhD students, they can at least write that after my study is over, all the patients will be put on this particular drug which is available in the pharmacy of our hospital. If we cannot give free post trial access, at least something, some provision for the management of disease condition of the patient has to be there. And compensation for study related injuries. So I just want to warn you or give you a precautionary warning that whenever MD students are done or academic studies are done, the institutions become sponsors. So ultimately the institution takes the responsibility of the study. And that's why be careful about these compensation problems also. Please don't say that nothing goes wrong with Ayurveda studies. And due to time constraint, I'm not going to share many things. I am unable to share many things, but things can go wrong. Even simple nadi sweat can create boils on patient's skins, and the patient can sue you in the court. So these kind of situations can happen. So please don't say that nothing goes wrong in Ayurveda studies. And lastly, the issues with ethics committee in Ayurvedic institutions. Dr. Sanjeev Rastogi has published a very nice article on this, that how our ethics committees are really performing. What are the actual status of Ayurvedic institutions ethics committees? In many of the institutions, the ethics committees are only for namesake. In some institutions, ethics committees are there, but they do not have any clue that what exactly they are supposed to do. And there is total mess whether they have the operating procedures, the standard operating procedures. Every EC has to have the SOPs. Do we really have those? Are we functioning really in independent way? Because I have seen the ethics committees where the chairperson, by rule, chairperson has to be from outside institution. So they make principal or dean of the college as a member secretary, just to involve the principal or dean in the ethics committee meetings. They give some label, and right, the dean or principal cannot participate as simple member, so he has to be given some designation. So available designation is of member secretary, so that designation is given, but it is a wrong practice. Principal or dean should not participate in the ethics committee deliberations, discussions, meetings. Then competency of members. generally in Ayurveda college, the members are invited because they are expert in Ayurveda. But remember that for working in ethics committee, they should be expert in Ayurveda or ethics. So we have to consider this, and if we want to, there is no harm in involving participants or members who have competency or who are trained, who are expert in Ayurveda, but then give them training in ethics committee, and that is again the responsibility of ethics committee, existing ethics committee or institution. As I have said, objective is not to review the technical components, but to review the ethical components. And we have seen what are the different ethical components the ethics committee has to review. Periodic reviews. Does any ethics committee really do this, or only sanction the projects in the beginning and then no contact, no communication with the investigator, no monitoring, no accreditations, no registration of the ethics committee anywhere? So this is how the ethics committees are working as of now. So what is the solution? We have to have a extensive capacity building program in Ayurveda ethics, and there has to be awareness in scientific community about ethics, that it is an important aspect, and there are ethical issues related to Ayurveda research also. I have given you few examples. I am not saying that I have covered everything about the ethics in Ayurveda. It was not possible also. And everybody on his or her experience can come up with some different issues. But there has to be an awareness in scientific community about ethics. And ultimately, we have to understand that ethics is not a committee, but it is a process to make research ethical and more scientific. And we all should, progress towards it and strive for it. In a very short time, we from my institution, that is IRSHA, Interactive Research School for Health Affairs, Bharati Vidyapeeth, we are going to announce a course in ethics for Ayurveda ethics committee members and Ayurveda experts, and that course is sanctioned by Ministry of Ayush. So very soon we will declare the dates and it's how it will happen, because due to COVID situation we will have it in online only. So just keep looking for the announcement of this course, and I expect that many of you will participate in this course, as through this lecture we have all understood and appreciated the importance of ethics in Ayurveda research. So thank you very much. If there are any questions, I will be happy to take.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for a wonderful lecture. Almost you have covered all aspects regarding Ayurveda also and general ethical guidelines. So thank you very much for your lecture. And now I could see there are various questions in chat box. I request Vaidya Tapasvi sir to take one by one some few important questions. Tapasvi sir?
Yeah, Tapasvi sir, before you start, I just want to address one issue which will be in everybody's mind, that registration of ethics committee. This is something which everybody would like to ask, and I just want to tell you that yes, we can register ethics committee, though it is not necessary essential for Ayurvedic ethics committee as of now. But there are two types of registration. One is for the ECs which are doing or which are reviewing the regulatory clinical trials. Regulatory clinical trials means after review of EC, the drug will come in market. So if you are involving in such type of projects, if you are reviewing such kind of projects, then your ethics committee has to be registered with CDSCO. If not, then you can register the ethics committee to DHR. There is a Department of Health Research, and the ethics committee can be registered with that. Of course, it is not yet necessary, mandatory for Ayurvedic disease. There is no harm, because this will definitely improve the functioning and working pattern of the ethics committee in Ayurvedic institutions. DHR, we have to register the ethics committees with DHR, Department of Health Research.
Tapasvi sir?
Ila, ask the questions. Some questions are in chat
Yes.
box.
Yes, madam.
Tapasvi sir?
Yes, madam.
Huh.
Please define expedited review.
Expedited review is when as I have shown the risk category, when the risk is as good as to some survey studies. So there is involvement of human participants, but the risk is as good as the minimal risk which we encounter in day-to-day life. So these studies can go for expedited review. But when there is some blood collection, some interviewing, some more detailing of giving the drug, administration of drug, follow-ups, long-term studies, for all such studies there has to be a full committee review. Otherwise, you can go ahead with the expedited review. Or just some amendments have to be considered. Project has been already reviewed by ethics committee, permission is given, but some amendments have come up during the course of time, then they can go for the expedited review.
The next question is, madam, for what about vaccine trials? Whether participants will be remunerated?
The participants are given compensation for their participation. There are two types of compensation also. One is for the loss which is incurred due to the participation. Suppose they come from far off places, they are not able to go for their work for a day. For these kind of things, the compensation is given. Another compensation is for research related injuries. If something goes wrong, then there is a calculation, there is a formula, and accordingly we have to calculate how much compensation has to be given. Generally for vaccine trial, the compensation for the loss of daily wages and whatever is given is only huge, because there is a lot of risk also involved, but that has to be seen by ethics committee that it should not be undue inducement, like you know that many people give blood only for taking money. So these kind of situations shouldn't happen. This is the responsibility of ethics committee.
For a survey study with only questionnaire format, do we require IC permission? If IC permission not there in institute, then can we conduct study with informed consent of participants, but without IC permission?
For every study which involves human participation, ethics committee permission is absolutely important, absolutely required. Means any study. So in your survey, human participants are there, so you need to take a ethics committee permission. Good journals also ask for the ethics committee permission. If there is no mention of ethics committee permission, the journals can reject your article. If your institution doesn't have, if you are in an educational institute and your institute doesn't have ethics committee, please have one ethics committee in your institution. Ask your management to have an ethics committee. If that cannot be done, then you can use the facility of other institutions ethics committee. You can have an MOU with that institution, and those fees, I mean how to enter into MOU has been given in the ICMR guidelines. But ethics committee permission has to be taken.
Okay. Hello. Rajan Kulkarni sir want to ask some questions, I think. Rajan Kulkarni sir, is he there?
He can post in chat box, madam.
Yeah, but he started his video. Okay. And tell the names of the participants who want to ask the questions. Okay.
Another question in chat box, madam. A clinical study is planned on extra pharmacopoeial herd. Can we utilize published toxicity studies as a basis to take further for clinical studies?
If you want to use the already published toxicity studies, then you have to at least show that your drug, the phytochemistry, is exactly matching with whatever is being used. The specimen should be used. Specimen should be similar. The drug sample should be similar. So at least that kind of, if not toxicity, at least do some phytochemistry, basic physicochemical test, and show that your drug is matching with the drug which is used in the published study.
Can we take few more questions, madam?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. Please tell if a questionnaire must contain informed consent or not.
Questionnaire is questionnaire, but along with questionnaire, you should have informed consent. If you are sending online questionnaire, at least have some provision in that also, that whether you are willing to participate in the survey. If the person says yes, then only the next questionnaire gets open. If he says no there, then the questionnaire will not get open. At least some kind of consent has to be there in every research involving human participants.
Generally, in sponsored trials, PI has to only conduct trials. All is said by sponsors. Then what to do?
So what is the question in that? If the protocol is given by the company, you can always contribute. Means you can always tell the company if you want to change something in that. That kind of modifications you can do. Some to some extent the modifications can be done in the protocol, and you have to take the ethics committee approval of your institutional committee, and then only you can start the research project. So I am not clear with the question, like what is the role. Means investigator has to, in a multicentric or in a pharma sponsored studies, investigator has to follow the protocol which is given by the pharma company, but it is less likely that they will tell you that use the protocol as it is what we have given. You have always a chance, you always have an opportunity to express your views and to modify it here and there little bit, and according to your institutional ethics committee needs.
I mean to say, madam, कि for COVID consent, physical distancing should be followed. So physical actual sign of patient is required, or his relative sign चालेल असं.
But if the patient is not in a severe condition, then patient can give his consent, his or her consent. And as I said, there are different ways. You can take LAR signature if you want, if you feel that it is so risky. But you can always take consent of participant, the actual patient also, in some or other way. There are online apps available. There is online, as you have prepared a Google form today, you can have something like that, but you can have consent of the patient also. The conditions where it is very difficult, then you can go for LAR, the legally acceptable representatives. Whenever the patient can give the consent, you have to take the patient's consent.
One question from me. Actually,
Here one comment I can see, that layman is not interested to attend meeting. It is chairperson's responsibility that he has to involve. Means, wherever I am serving as a chairperson, I myself explain the project to the layman in the language which is understandable to the person, and it is not an exaggeration, but everybody who is a member in the 3 committees where I serve as a chairperson participate. And in fact, they are very happy to come for the meeting, that they are playing an important role in Ayurveda or biomedical research. So you have to make them part of the team. If they feel like nobody is listening to me, I am not understanding anything, then why they will come for the meeting? So as per ICMR's guideline, it is the responsibility of chairperson to involve everyone's active participation.
मैम अगर कोई जैसे हमारे यहाँ कोविड आइसोलेशन वार्ड है, तो उनके पेशेंट्स के इंफॉर्मेशन शीट्स, मतलब केस रिकॉर्ड फॉर्म ऑलरेडी जो हमारे कॉलेज में है, उसके अकॉर्डिंग कोहॉर्ट रिट्रोस्पेक्टिव स्टडीज वो हम प्रेजेंट करना चाह रहे हैं, तो उसमें एथिकल कंसिडरेशन में हमें क्या, वो ऑलरेडी पार्टिसिपेंट्स का तो हमने इन्फॉर्म कंसेंट फॉर्म लिया नहीं है, तो उसके लिए
नहीं,
हमें क्या करना
पहले
है?
आपने यू मीन टू से कि आपने क्लिनिकल डेटा कलेक्ट किया है पेशेंट से, but you do not have
जी
you
क्लिनिकल डाटा
you have yes, but you have
पेशेंट
not planned it. Yeah, you have not planned it as a research study, you have not taken informed consent, but now the data is interesting and you want to publish it. बराबर है?
मैम
हाँ,
जी
तो
जी
इस
जी
कंडीशन इस कंडीशन में आपको एथिक्स कमिटी को अप्लाई करना पड़ेगा that we have done so and so clinical work. हमने ये clinical work किया है, we find that it is important for publishing because it can be useful for the further patients. So in view of this, kindly give us permission. The names of the patients will be kept anonymous. Their identity will not be disclosed. But this data, what you are talking, and this happens not only for COVID patients, in many situations, you can collect the data from your hospitals, and that is a hospital's property. You know, that is a hospital's right on that data. So you have to apply to ethics committee in a such a way that now I want to do retrospective analysis of the clinical work which I have done, and kindly allow us for that. And we will not reveal the identity of patients anywhere in the published manuscript. And then ethics committee will give you the permission. Means they will have their own some set of questions also, queries also. They may like to see your manuscript, whatever. That depends on your ethics committee. But you have to apply to ethics committee at this time point also that we want to publish this data.
मैम उसके लिए क्या क्या डॉक्यूमेंट्स की नीड होगी जो एथिकल कमेटी को सबमिट करने चाहिए?
अभी आपको एथिक्स कमेटी को सबमिट करने के लिए अभी भी आपको एक प्रोटोकॉल जैसा ही लिखना पड़ेगा, जिसमें आप जैसे हम लिखते हैं कि शुरू में लिखते हैं कि ये पेशेंट्स हम इंक्लूड करेंगे, इनको हम ये ट्रीटमेंट देंगे, वैसे करेंगे। आप अभी उल्टा लिखेंगे कि हम लोगों ने इन लास्ट 4 months वी हैव सीन सो मेनी पेशेंट्स ऑफ कोविड and generally this treatment was given. We have collected data in these terms like fever, whatever fever, duration of stay in hospital, whatever you have collected the data. Now we want to analyze this and publish it. So this is your protocol now. Protocol means whatever you want to do now with the patients, the data that you have to write down and submit it to ethics committee. आप मेरा पॉइंट समझ में आया होगा आपको? इट इज अ रेट्रोस्पेक्टिव स्टडी.
जी जी.
Hello, Supriya madam. Just I want to ask about the registration of IEC. It is mandatory to register the IEC, Institutional Ethical Committee, to CDSCO, but they are refusing our proposal as we don't have the interdisciplinary research. That is
No,
along
it is not interdisciplinary research. I have answered this question. Actually, this was the first question only. That the CDSCO registration is required for the ECs which are doing regulatory clinical trials. And regulatory clinical trials means after you do the clinical trial, the drug is going to come in the market. In case of Ayurvedic drugs, the drugs are already in market. We do not do these regulatory clinical trials. Is a specific term applicable for the modern medicine drugs, that phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So after that phase 3, the drug is going to come in market, and the ethics committees which are looking after such trials will only get registered with CDSCO. Other ethics committees can be registered with DHR, that is Department of
DHR. Yeah, I know. Okay, thank you.
So Tapasvi sir, if there are no more questions, should we?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. One more question is there. If a researcher is not currently belonging to any institution, what is the procedure to take IC approval?
The researcher has to then collaborate with some institution, and through that institution, the project has to be submitted, and the ethics committee permission has to be taken. Because even if you have a huge patient load in your OPDs, you cannot do a study. There is no provision that for every OPD there used to be a provision like independent ethics committee initially, but now the independent ethics committee role is limited to bioequivalence studies. So we cannot submit the application to even independent ethics committees, and for that I will suggest that you should, collaborate with some institution and work in collaboration with that institution's ethics committee.
Madam, last question. If an institute and university not follow EC guidelines, what are the consequences and where to report it?
There is nothing like reporting system, but if the university is also not following ethical guidelines, I'm finding it very strange. But if some particular university is not following any ethical guidelines, what is ultimately ethical guidelines? Ethics is something which is in our mind also. Like a researcher, we also have some obligations. We also have some duties and some do's and don'ts to follow in the research. So suppose the university is not following the ethical guidelines, the institution is also not following ethical guidelines, your papers will not get published, your manuscripts will just lie like that, because these are the necessary things as of now. You cannot go ahead with these things. So there is nothing like you can take action against them or you can sue them in the court. It is nothing like that. But you can explain the authorities, you can try to convince the management to have these things in pipeline.
Thank you, madam.
Okay. Shall I proceed further?
Yes, madam.
Okay. It was a nice question and answer session. Wonderful session. Now please fill up post assessment and feedback form. Then and then only you will get certificate on mail within 8 to 10 days later. As many requests are received to conduct other webinar for remaining EC members, teachers for UG, 4th year and PG student. As Supriya madam told that for EC members, Irsha is organizing online course. You can register, all participants can register for that. And now we are giving phone number and mail ID of Dr. Yogini Kulkarni madam and Dr. Lad madam. You kindly approach them for the same, as she is conducting regular workshops and webinars on research. Yogini madam, please SMS or please say some one word about that.
Actually, she is not there, I think.
Institute ethics.
Okay, then we will proceed further. Tapasvi sir, you please give phone number in chat box.
University आमची पाळतच
Now I
नाही.
request Vaidya Tapasvi sir to give vote of thanks at the end of session.
University पाळत नाही.
Vaidya Tapasvi sir, please. Yes, ma'am. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion of national webinar entitled Ethical Issues in Ayurveda Research. I, on behalf of Department of Trivaguna, CRC Nivili Pune, extend a sincere vote of thanks to Honorable Guest Speaker, Dr. Supriya Bhalerao Madam, for gracing the webinar and imparting the knowledge on the ethical issues in Ayurveda research in very simple words. I also wish to express my gratitude to our principal madam, respected Professor Dr. Lagini Kathir madam, for providing constant encouragement and guidance on every step for the arrangement of this webinar. I am also very grateful to Vice Principal Bogre sir for teaching non-teaching staff of CRC and Department of Trivaguna in particular. I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to our mother institute and all respected dignitaries of Pune District Education Association. I also extend my thanks to all the respected delegates for their overwhelming response and enormous cooperation in the fulfillment of this event. We thank you for being us in this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Priya madam. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. We must take thanks to our two IT men, Vaidya Tapasvi sir and Mr. Shetty sir, and other office staff for their efforts. Please submit post assessment now. You will not get the link afterwards. With this vote of thanks to all, we are going to sum up this event. Thank you all. Thank you, Supriya Madam, and thanks again to our Mother Institute, PDAS College of Ayurveda and Research Center, to facilitate this free webinar for all. Thank you. Thank you, Madam.
Thanks again, Ila. लिंक कॉपी करू देत जरा 2 मिनिटं बंद करू नका कारण ते आपण आता टाकलेले फीडबॅक फॉर्मची लिंक कॉपी करू देत लोकांना.
Post assessment and feedback form will also made tomorrow to remaining all participants, but you will not get any certificate without filling the post assessment and feedback form. Please note the same. Shall we leave now?
Okay. Ila,
Okay.
Thank
very
you.
nice,
Madam.
and I am proud of you, my department, Tapasvi sir and Bhor madam. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Supriya Madam.
Thank you.
Aradi sir, you have any questions or you want to say something? As you are our EC member.
I want to just congratulate all of you and thank you very much from the participant side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Tapasvi sir.